very much for Shireen, and welcome everyone. Hope those of you that are joining several of these, finding them interesting, informative. Will be recording these, or we are recording these, and then posting them on our site so you can refer them to other people. You can also tell people that each week we have one of these sessions at lunchtime on Wednesdays, and lunchtime Toronto time. Obviously, if you're somewhere else in the world, it may not be lunchtime. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Professor Ali Asghari, who's an expert in disaster management, emergency management, business consulting. But most importantly, in his role here, he is director of CFAL. And rather than do a bad job of trying to explain what CFAL is, I'm going to ask him to very quickly explain CFAL before he gives his presentation today.
No voice, Dr. Asghari. Your microphone.
Just a second. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. And get a start. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Andrew and Shireen, for the introduction and land acknowledgement. A brief introduction about CFAL York for those of you who may not have been previously either in this session or learned about CFAL York. CFAL York is one of the CFAL centers created by jointly by York University, UNITAR, and York Region. It is a center that is meant to develop trainings for executives and leaders and civic society in different areas, particularly around disaster and emergency management, health and development, entrepreneurship and economic development, diversity and inclusion, as well as promoting sustainable development goals. This series is one of the series that we are collaborating with our colleagues from Lausanne, as mentioned by Andrew. And our goal is really to enhance and promote the dialogue around sustainable development goals in principle, but particularly and especially in this case around economy and environment. That is the subject of this talk also. Now, when I was asked basically to think about this question, and also what, from my perspective, disciplinary and also some personal considerations, I thought it is really difficult to make a connection between environment and economy in today's world and what is going to happen in front of us in the future without consideration of disasters. So that is the philosophy behind this talk, and I hope using some of the existing evidences and data that is publicly available, I am able to provide you with some ideas or maybe areas that you can think about more, and also connect this with the rest of the discussions in this series, and also what you may be thinking of in your disciplinary areas or areas of focus. Now, the question is, of course, to all of us, and although this is the question posed for the competition, and many of you have previously heard about this, and as I said, my goal is to bringing the disaster aspect into this scholarship competition question. In fact, really it is hard. I'm saying we cannot ignore disasters from these equations because the impacts that disasters have on the economy are so great and becoming even greater that is impossible for us to neglect that. It may have been okay, for example, to some extent in the past, like 30 years ago, But from the facts and data and information that we have in hand right now, it is really impossible. And that is the point I'm hoping to raise throughout this discussion. And most of my slides are talking how and why this is important, and what are the interfaces, connections between disasters, economy, and environment. And you know, I know many of you already have expertise and knowledge in this area, but this may help probably better connect this and have some evidences of those as well. Now, instead of me writing on the board, I have created some quick videos that try to explain the concept. From one hand, obviously, we have the environment that is the source of many resources and activities. And on the other hand, of course, you have the economy. It is a very simple model, obviously. We know that the environment provides lots of resources and services to the economy. And on the other hand, economic activities make pressure or pressures and impacts on the environment. Some of these environment also has some hazards, inherent hazards, of course, like natural-based hazards. And economy also creates some hazards that are technological hazards in the concept of disaster and emergencies. These two hazards sometimes create disaster events. But we know also that hazards, when become disasters, they impact both the economy and the environment. And the extent of impacts could be different depending the type of the events, depending on the size of the event, depending on where they happen, and a lot of other factors, obviously. But what is, and this is true for both cases, for hazards that are turned into disasters from economic activities, and those that are based in natural phenomena. But what is happening now, and we already know about this, and much of the conversations and discourse around disasters and economy and environments are the fact that these are no longer one-time events. These are happening very frequently and even more larger in terms of impacts. And also they influence the natural processes, natural phenomena that are in the nature, creating some of those hazards. And to make it simple, obviously, we all know, for example, what is now happening with regarding climate change, that this impacts, pressures that we put on the environment creates or enlarge basically the hazards, which create even bigger disasters. We had smaller floods in the past, now we have bigger floods because of the interventions and consequences of this complexity and also cascading relationship that exists with them. Same with economic activities. We used to create, smaller scale hazards impacting an environment locally, sometimes regionally, but now we are basically having technologies, industries that can create catastrophe for much larger areas in a rapid phase. So that is the basic concept that that describes or tries to describe this relationship. And obviously, over time, if we keep this pressure going, creating more hazard, creating more technological and natural-based hazard, at the end of the day, this environment would not be able to provide us with the resources and services that we enjoy right now. And definitely the economy will face the consequences of that, not having the resources, and we are all in trouble in a sense. Now, I think I'm gonna. Now, this is better explained and in our context, when you replace or consider climate change, for example, as what we call it, or I can call it, a mega disaster. And this is very well explained in the recent report by IPCC. I encourage all of you to take a look at it. This came out a few days ago. And the major, of course, the big document is quite quite large, several thousand pages, but the summary is available. And what this report is telling us is exactly more or less what I showed you before, but in a different way, and also focusing on climate change related event. That's we can call the mega disaster, basically. And the same concept, really, you have human society that is basically our economy as part of that. And on the other hand, you have the environment that is our ecosystems of different kinds. And each of these, of course, impact each other. And these impacts, depending on the sources, could reduce or increase what the functions are, or the functions that each of these elements are doing. But again, the same concept I'm saying, because this, for example, climate change can impact our ecosystem's ability to provide the services and goods and resources that we enjoy. And on the other hand, it could diminish some of our activities, or impact some of our activities that we do. That, and in the same time, our activities are also impacting the environment same way. So, but at the center here, you have all this concept of risk again, which is created as these impacts are generated. You have climate hazards, you have exposure that is again our all human and economic activities, and vulnerability that is an intersection between putting all these resources in hazardous areas. So that's the same concept in the context of climate change that is also in front of us in terms of the new documents and materials put to us. In the same document, if you look at it, for many people, it's not really still clear that climate change is impacting, of course, everyone globally, but us in North America, even more severe in many aspects. And this figure is again from the same document that has been released recently. You can see that in North America, for example, if you look at the impacts of climate change on water scarcity and food production, you can see that that's the only part that you have some sort of positive, negative possible impacts. But whether it is going to be more positive or more negative, it's not clear. But it could be mixed, and it could be mixed spread all over the space in the countries that are in North America. But the most other aspects, for example, impacts on health and well-being, that is included, for example, infectious disease, mental health, displacement, etc. Climate change and this disaster is really impacting us negatively across the board. Same with impacts that this has on cities, settlements, and infrastructure. Again, these are the infrastructure places where most of our economic activities are happening. Again, you see we will be impacted negatively this. Now, the amount of impact, if you want to monetize this, or if you want to create a sort of monetary value for it, I can say it is relatively, at least at this point, either impossible, or even the estimates that are provided to us are sort of very, very I would say conservative estimates of the impacts, because it is too difficult, complex to capture the exact amount of those impacts. But keep in mind that this is really happening in North America, even worse than some other parts. And and the other aspects of all these things is that over time we have been witnessing, and being in this field, I can also tell you based on my own research that over time risks are becoming what we call it more systemic, which is because of interconnections and interdependencies and kind of accelerating interdependencies that we are creating and having between our existing systems, whether human systems or technological systems. This is from this document that I highly encourage all of you, if you have not previously seen, to take a look at it. And this document, this is the government from the document from Government of Canada in a Changing Climate. This is recent and also talks a lot about different aspects of or impacts of climate change on our society. And to me, if we just implement and listen to the proposals and solutions provided even in this document, we should be able to make a lot of changes way ahead. But this example, you can see extreme weathers, all these climate change related type of disasters, obviously they can have some initial direct impacts on some of our infrastructure. This example is looking at, for example, the impacts that this drought or extreme precipitation would have on energy. And now you can see the energy is a very classical example. You can put this here, communication, for example. But anyways, you have energy here. Energy is used in many different ways in almost every industry to a high level. And when this is disrupted, which is now the primary, and really in most cases disasters when happen, especially weather-related disasters, they severely impact the energy infrastructure like power lines, etc. And these disruptions could interrupt a lot of other activities in the economy. And at the end of the day, obviously, if you calculate all of these numbers in terms of impacts, you will see there are huge economic consequences just because of an event, an extreme heat event or extreme cold event or weather event that is disrupting the energy system. So it is also, what I want to say here is that over time, we are shifting from disasters that were single impacting certain elements of our economy in a limited way to a situation where these impacts are larger and impacting several systems at the same time. And each of them may have even further impacts because of the connections that they have with other systems. For example, you can see if internet is disrupted because of lack of power, we will have even more impacts as a result of that first impact. So that is important. Now, the message here in this, again, coming from the IPCC report, is that we are approaching, and this is an alarming thing, we are approaching to worst case scenarios. And in this picture, you see this graph, we are now here. We have just a few years left to reaching to a point where we will have to think about the worst case scenarios, because actually the decision that we make now may let us avoid going to the worst case scenario. But if we reach here without actions that are needed, we would be already on the path to what we call it worst case scenario. And worst case scenario in disaster and emergency management is really where you have the highest impact of your disaster event, the top and highest in all aspects. And this is what we would be facing in different types of impacts for this situation. Now, this was a global perspective, but what is also important is to look at the same situation at local level, like at the city level, because that is where the aggregate values are coming from. Now, and cities are also both in terms of environment and in terms of contribution to the economy are really important. Now, you see the same situation, but in a more monetary approach. This is an estimate of the cost of climate change. And as I said, I look at climate change as a mega disaster that creates some other disasters with it. Now, for the city of Edmonton, they have gone enough to make some calculations on that. What would cost the city if temperature is going up to different degrees over time, up to, for example, 6 degrees from where we are now. And based on their calculations, you can see the social cost as well as the cost on GDP, gross domestic product of the city. Now, obviously, these numbers are quite large for a city as size of Edmonton. And at the same time, this really means that all of us living in cities like that should get prepared to pay in our property tax soon, something like, I don't know what they are going to call it, but currently, for example, we are paying for firefighting, but expect that to happen if things go the way they are going right now, to have sort of charges for the city to fight climate change events or extreme events related to climate change, because at some point this is going to be inevitable. It is not going to be one-time thing. It's going to be continuous, unfortunately. So this is just to give you the possibility or thinking about the impacts of these kind of events on basically the local level. And this could be materialized also the same way for smaller cities or towns, depending on where they are and what they do and how they finance their system. And some of them may be actually facing much more complicated situations. Now, when it comes to sort of conceptualizing some of these long-term impacts of disasters on the economy, there are many different hypotheses. There are many different trends based in theory and also in what we see in reality. Now, I'm going to draw some of these processes or trends based on what is currently discussed in the literature. Now, suppose you have the GDP that is your gross domestic product for a country like Canada on the vertical, and time in years in your horizontal axis. If your gross domestic products increases over time with 2-3%, for example, every year, you will have a sort of linear increase, not necessarily linear, but a kind of linear increase in your economy over time. Now, when a disaster event happens, some countries or a country may actually, of course, have some reduction in their GDP, but they start to sort of recovery, but not to the level that is expected or was expected if the economy was going to grow normally without any disaster. You see, there are many different trends depending on the country, depending on the situation. The lowest part and probably the worst case is when you are not really able to come back to previous trend. This is where an economy is really has no resilience. And some, at different levels, you may have additional capacity, so your resilience is a little bit better, but you may still not get to the point where you want. And probably one good scenario is where your GDP is going to decrease, but it is going to come back to normal situation in a rather reasonable time period, which is, we call it a resilient economy, basically. It has been able to recover and get back to. There are also some possibilities that an economy may actually not only get to the previous trend, but also may go over it. In fact, doing better after a disaster happens. We call sometimes this build back better. And there is even another one that is highly unlikely to happen, but has happened in some cases, where a disaster creates opportunities for total change and transformation, where you see, the shift is quite faster, and also the economy goes much beyond the previously estimated trend. So, but one problem with this hypothesis, with this description of the situation, is really that it assumes that one event happens and nothing happens till till long after, which was true. For example, 20-30 years ago, we had one major hurricane in Canada, and then nothing till 2003, for example. That could be possible. But this is unfortunately no longer the case, and because we are not facing just one disaster event in a year and nothing in future. The case that we are looking at today is more or less like this, and I haven't continued all these curves, but I can show that this is my hypothesis, and also what I can provide some data for it, that we have this situation as we previously explained. Is this the next slide? Maybe let me show. See if that is the one. Sorry, I have to go to the next slide. Yeah, here it is. The problem is that, as unfortunately you are trying to recover, I'm only taking the cases where the economy is resilient and a little bit resilient, that is going to be built back better. So even forgetting about those lower cases, the economy that is strong enough to come back after a disaster. Now, if there is no one other event, you may be in a good situation. But the problem nowadays is that we will have more disasters happening, and thus you will be getting to this point, but eventually, because of the next disaster, you are falling down again to lower part, and over time you will be still lagging this. And the fact, or an example of this, is that what is happening today. We are in the middle of a pandemic, hopefully toward the end, and now there are other disasters and emergencies happening. In BC, for example, we have had wildfire in 2019, 20, almost all years, but some severe ones. And then you had major flood in 2021. These are all impacting the economy of the British Columbia, and of course, Canada in same way. So this is no longer the case. We will have more events happening and impacting their situation. Now, it is interesting to take a closer look at what happened in in different countries after COVID. Again, this is relationship between disaster and economy. These are some based on data from OECD for different countries. As you can see, again, at the start of the pandemic, you see a sharp decline in the economy, or basically growth in the economy in almost every country. Although depending on the conditions in the country, situation was different, but overall the trends are quite similar, especially in countries that share the same level of economy and this is for Indonesia, for example. This is for Ireland. This is for Israel. This is for Italy, Japan, Korea. Is a little bit different here. Luxembourg, a smaller country. Mexico, very similar to trend in Canada. Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway. You see, the shift is happening still, because we have not finished the pandemic. Almost none of them are reaching to pre-pandemic level in terms of economic growth, but some show a little bit increasing trend, some steady trends. And this is based on data for up to basically February. So it's very up to date based on the estimates and the data that is coming from different countries. Now, this is the last one is for the US. You see more or less similar to Canada. And now I have, I'm going to next slide, sorry. All right, this is for Canada in more detail. Quite similar, as I said, to the US. And we had a very sharp decline at the beginning of the pandemic till summer, and gradually, up and down, but not to the level of the pandemic that we were before. Perhaps starting this month or so, with restrictions and hopefully lower cases, we will be probably moving toward the upper level, and so things may change a bit, but still we have ways to go. And now we are, of course, all countries now are facing another challenge, which is impacting global economy again, and we need to see what that unfolds on the system. But that's not subject of my talk now. Now, one point also is to think that this is happening across Canada. Because of COVID, all provinces had this decline in their GDP, and no matter what kind of economy you had, most of economies were impacted heavily. Some probably less than others because of the size of the economy and also the type of economic activities. But overall, this was across the country. However, we should mention that these impacts are not when it comes to individual, when it comes to type of businesses. It's not really equal impacts. Some suffer really more than others, and there are lots of equity issues there. And over time, we also see that there is an increased trend in what we call it insured losses in Canada. This is up to 2021. You see over time, all the losses that are insured, and not all disaster-related losses are insured in Canada. You see that is increasing, which is important because it shows that insurance industry is getting has to pay more for the insured losses, and over time this may create some major issues in that sector as well. And there are some major events in Canada that contributed to these catastrophic losses. For example, just in 2021, and believe it, I mean, in 2000, for example, 2001, if you were to list some of these major disasters in Canada, you may have one or two major ones like this. But in 2021, you have so many. In fact, these are really big disasters in terms of economic losses as measured by insured just losses, which is quite extensive. And again, it is across Canada. We don't have any particular province that you can say it's not being impacted by these kind of events. Now, I mentioned about the uninsured losses. What is important is that many of disaster impacts are really uninsured, meaning that you have to add 3 or more times to the insured losses to get to calculate what is the total losses, because uninsured losses are quite also quite a lot. And these are also, remember that these are really looking into direct impacts, not indirect impacts, long-term impacts of disasters in the economy. What these trends are telling us is that, unfortunately, as time goes on, we are facing a quite a lot increase in both insured and uninsured losses because of disasters, and much of it is related to climate related events. And this is just what happened to insured losses in Canada in terms of basically some of the key events. Here you see, for example, for McMurray wildfire in 2016 created the major losses, mostly because wildfire or fire is covered under insurance, but flooding is not covered by insurance. So that's what I'm saying. Some of these major disaster events are not covered with insurance. So much of what we see as insured losses are not really capturing the true essence of the impacts. Now, one interesting area also to look at it, which in my view also has a lot to talk or discuss or think about, is what is the perceptions of risk globally and what is the perception of risk in Canada. This is based on, I think last week, Charles also mentioned about this particular case, global risk report, that risk matrix. This report this year has listed global top 5 global risks that you can see here on the lower part. To be 3 of them are basically environmental related risk, climate action, extreme weather, biodiversity, etc. And 2 of them are societal type of risk. Now, when it comes to Canada, the situation or the data that was behind creation of these risk levels are quite different in Canada. As you can see here, you have 2 of the environmental risks, and the other 2 are economic risk, rather than, for example, here that you have societal risk overall globally. Here, the risks that are perceived by major companies responding to this survey are, one is, for example, debt crisis in large economies like US, and another one, employment and livelihood crisis. These are the 2 economic concerns, as we also are also concerned about climate actions and extreme weather. So interestingly, as I put it here in this message, that in Canada we are worried about the environmental risk as well as economic risk at the same time, which is understandable considering where we are, considering our connections with the U.S. economy and situation like that. But at the same time, you see that environmental concerns are quite within our top 5 as well. Now, I put this here again from the IPCC new report, that this is what we are facing. This is what our governments need to look at and decide what they want to do. This is very, very clear. We have some choices, but the best choice is where you take the green path, and for that, of course, we have to sacrifice. We have to do something. We have to take actions. We have to make trade-offs. But on the other hand, if we fail to do, that is unfortunately the case based on what happened in the previous climate change conference, and based on what you saw in the risk climate that was also provided by World Economic Forum. You see that these trends are unfortunately are not taken. I mean, the path, the green path doesn't seem to be what many people are really looking into. But the end result is clear. If we make the choice to do nothing, that's the end of it, where we are facing severe consequences of that. And if we take actions, that's where we go. That is where we will be able to, enhance the sustainability, keep the economy and environment going together in a safer way. Otherwise, there are some middle part, but definitely, if we have the choice to go the green path from now, we would be. It will be much easier than later on if we want to change it from here to there. Obviously, gradually we can make it, but at this point it's going to be either too late or too difficult to achieve. Now, it is my last slide, and that is going back to the previous circle, which is what can we do to avoid this situation. And again, this IPCC report is clear about that, and that 35 pages or maybe 75 pages of this report, that is executive summary for policymakers. If they all read this, if they all listen to this, I think that is clear and tells us what to do. There is no need to do additional research or spend money to find out what is the problem, what we should do. There you go. We have done it. Canada has done its own report. IPCC has done its report. That is the past. That is the what we need to do. We need to adapt ourselves. We need to mitigate these impacts to reduce these climate change related risks and events and all disasters. When I say climate, it is an example, but really disasters of other kinds also impacts economies, and we have to approach them the same way. We have to mitigate them. We have to adapt ourselves. And on the other hand, you have to make sure that this ecosystem is taken care of from human activities. We do more. We conserve. We restore the environment, and also try to do actions that mitigate climate change from our actions as human society, through adaptation, through mitigations. And there is no other way. I mean, this is simple. This is not complicated matter in terms of understanding it. And there is no other way around by saying that a magic that can solve these issues. This needs action. This needs a lot of thinking and attention to make a difference. Otherwise, disasters are really impacting us a lot. And the past, as I was probably too pessimistic about saying that this is unfortunately the path we seem to be going to, but that is really if we do not take it serious. So there will be no economy if we do not take action now, and that that is more or less because of the severe impacts of climate change on the systems. I stop here and thank you very much for listening. So I hope I have provided some materials for discussions and dialogue for the few minutes that are
Absolutely, Ali.
remaining.
Yeah, we actually have quite a large number of questions that are raised. I'm trying to kind of, what's the word, aggregate some of them to try and kind of make a bigger question, but there are a lot here. So let me just start off by asking a couple of them. So one of them is around environmental protection laws, the role of legislation versus the role of, you know, voluntary action, and what role should each play in developing a strategy? And does developing a strategy only work when things are going well, when the economy is doing well, or can you actually start to work on the environmental issues when the economy is in trouble?
That's a very good point, and I like to make a connection between that and what also exists in disaster and emergency situations. In disaster management, we use volunteers a lot, but mostly when an emergency happens, because there is a tendency from people to come out and provide help and assistance. But this is only for that very short phase of disaster, not before, which is, of course, for example, for the time like normal situation when we want to have systems and actions to mitigate, to prepare ourselves for disaster, and not much also after the emergency phase of disaster is done and we go into recovery part. The same, unfortunately, is true here. When the economy is in trouble, the politicians and others start to think about some of these measures that they can take to save. But in normal situations, if there is a normal, unfortunately, this is not the case. Many of our agencies, many of our policymakers, systems are not thinking deeply enough, thinking long-term enough to start establishing these kind of laws and regulations that can help us, you know, going beyond this sort of at a point when we have to do the things, and because we have to do, we are taking actions. Otherwise, there's no impact. So, in a sense, the voluntary thing is not, unfortunately, happening a lot, or I cannot see that happening, or to the level that is going to assist us to get out of this crisis that we are facing now and what is coming next in the future.
Thank you. I have another question. Again, I'm trying to generalize some of these questions. So we're seeing a number of new technology tools in our arsenal. I mean, the person asking the question talks about machine learning and AI, and I certainly they're incredibly important and have profound impact. But do you see new tools that are available that will help build resilience or help us manage disasters?
Yes, of course, general yes to both questions. We have seen and we are seeing the trend of using technology to both understand the problem or better understand the problems, and also trying to provide solutions to those problems or some of those problems, both in related to climate events or disasters. We now are able to better predict the situation, and much of these new reports that are coming are actually doing that. And for example, just capturing or having estimates of greenhouse gas emissions. Using these technologies, we are able to better estimate and predict the values now and in the future, which helps a lot in terms of making policy and decisions. Same with disasters. We are able to, in terms of flooding, a lot of deep learning, machine learning, and AI are now used in predicting flooding in a really level of detail that we were not able to do in the past. But these are some technological possibilities and solutions, but some, as we discussed before, are really lying on the core societal aspect of implementing these technologies toward these societal goods, that is making communities more sustainable, because the same technologies can and are if not more, but at kind of same level are used to extract the environment and impact the environment in negative way as well, unfortunately. So we are in a competition between use of this technology to extract more and use of the technology to conserve better and manage this situation better. That's a different thing, probably.
So thank you very much, and I think it's really interesting. I mentioned to you, and it got rejected, so I have to go back and think again, that I was actually working on a paper on the impact of the shared economy on resilience. And the idea is that the shared economy allows people to use underutilized resources, like a spare bedroom or a spare car or another service, to meet a need in the short term without a big investment, and was very good at matchmaking. In other words, finding people with a need. And the paper, cited examples where people that had ride-sharing platforms during COVID moved them to be ambulance-sharing platforms, so they could quickly get ambulances to patients. And you think more and more about that shared economy. The mentality behind it is quite somewhat different. It's, I'm going to say, more entrepreneurial, more informal, but the technology is allowing matchmaking quite quickly. And one tends to think that maybe that aspect of technological innovation is going to be part of resilience, because I absolutely understand your comment about volunteers come out when there's natural disaster, but a large part of it is how do you manage that? And if you could have a shared platform that says, hey, I need some help with building a wall here, and someone else says, yes, I can do that. And it's interesting because it talks about building neighborhoods and building community as well. So it moves away from, you could do those transactions without money changing hands, but you do need information to change hands. And what's the word? I'm going to say trust. You need to build trust, because if someone's coming in to help you with something, you need to trust that they have good intent as well. So it's kind of interesting to see that aspect of technology and building resilience too.
Absolutely, this is very good point, and this too, in a different or with different name, is currently used in disaster and emergency management through both business continuity and what we call it mutual assistance. It's kind of same concept, but more in using extra resources that different communities have and are not used to respond, and then they tap into them to use them and get the service or recovery done. Same way, we also, for in business continuity, there are concepts of redundancy. For example, a lot of this that you want to make sure that you are having, sort of redundancy in the system that helps you to recover faster or better in case of emergencies. And these are sort of the same concept, but I think there are a lot that can be added to this, and especially when it comes to the solution for the environment and economy. Obviously, I think this concept can be transferred to those problems as well. I agree.
So thank you. I have one other question. It's kind of specific, so you can either say it's beyond the scope of the presentation, or you can answer it.
Sure.
But I absolutely understand the question. I'm just not sure it's the right context, but we can ask it. So the question is from Martin. It says, under Build Back Better, should we be doing preventative things to avoid these types of disasters in the future? For example, removing buildings from floodplains, shorelines affected by sea level rise, or should we continue to, put in place dikes and pumps to protect ourselves? And in Canada, and kind of relating to this question about the Prime Minister, do we have the appropriate powers in government to deal with these natural disasters as they do, for example, under FEMA in the United States?
Well, that is actually very relevant and very good question. And this is something that has been in disaster and emergency management discussions for a long period of time, which is using technology and sort of mitigation forces to mitigate the impacts of hazard. And on the other hand, approaches that are basically saying that if you are in the right, if you are in a wrong place, just move, shift your, and these are more of adaptation and these kind of approaches. Both are needed in my view. In some cases, adaptations, especially in case of flood zones, is much better long-term, especially if you look at the environmental consequences and the benefits that these kind of actions would have on the environment. Is much better to take those approaches compared to, for example, adding another dike or sort of infrastructure solutions that may continue to damage the environment. And at the end of the day, as we have seen it, and that is the point, you can never make an infrastructure that may sustain, you know, all kind of possibilities and future larger events. You make something, it may not work 10 years from now when we have bigger emergencies, bigger disaster events. So it's probably more wiser to change the location in some cases. So my suggestion, it depends on the case, but more or less adaptation to this nature would be more helpful than construction or adding additional infrastructure.
So thank you so much for your presentation today and answers to the question. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to just mention quickly that originally Eric Miller was going to be talking today. His presentation is now on the 16th when he's talking about economy and how you measure it and how you measure it against sustainability. But before that, on the 9th, we have Lina Brandt-Carrera talking about a transition to sustainable environment policies. So again, other perspectives that will lead to debate, discussions, create some new momentum around the role of sustainability, particularly at York University. And for those of you interested in entering the Sarit Scholarship, maybe give you some thoughts and ideas that you can go beyond, I'm going to call motherhood and apple pie statements about we have to look after both, actually to give you some insights based on the insights of our experts on specific challenges that need to be addressed and how you might address them, even if part of that is you know, setting up specific groups of people to look at a specific issue. You don't always have to have every answer, but putting questions on the agenda is also part of the problem, but they have to be specific. So I would like to thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Professor Asghari, for sharing your insights around you know, emergency management and impact. I think we all get very concerned about disasters and sustainability, and we know that we have to, you know, make trade-offs between the two. I think part of the what's the word? Part of the challenge is that sometimes we might have to sacrifice the economy to make sure that we are building sustainable outcomes. But I think there are ways to do that in a way that actually help the economy grow. And I think that's part of the challenge as we move forward.
Absolutely.
So
And
thank you so much for your time. Do you have any final comments?
No, just want to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope to see you again next week, and enjoy your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.